But let's keep things rolling here. Let me invite to this stage Megan Maloney with Guidehouse. Let's welcome her.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Meg Maloney. I'm an Associate Director with Guidehouse. Guidehouse is a $17 billion global consultancy providing advisory, digital, and managed services across both the commercial and public sectors. We're purpose-built to serve national security, energy, infrastructure, sustainability, financial services, and healthcare. Our mission is to solve the big problems, to build trust in society, and to help our clients shape the future. Our technology-focused and enabled solutions position clients for innovation, resilience, and growth. We have a lot in common with the Space Force. Our company launched in 2018, just 1 year prior to Space Force. We emanated from a large and known entity, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Like Space Force with Air Force, we were able to draw from a long history of experience, skill, and talent. We entered the market with a pre-existing reputation for quality. But we also wanted to build something different, and we took a clean sheets approach to do so. We started with the core of our work, a national security-focused public sector practice, and we intentionally built out from there, creating a complementary commercial practice in 2019, a digital technology practice in 2021, and a public sector practice that now spans all 15 executive departments of the US federal government. This purpose-built approach and the promise of challenging work that we do for our clients have drawn top-tier talent. We now have more than 18,000 personnel worldwide who stand ready to confront future challenges and outwit complexity in partnership with Guardians. So we know a thing or two about thinking differently. We're excited to be here today, and if you'd like to learn more, please come talk with us. Now I'd like to introduce our next session on the Personnel Management Act. The PMA allows the Space Force to design an alternative, single military personnel management system that integrates active component guardians and airmen serving in space-focused career fields into a unified service, offering both full and part-time work roles. We are honored to have a panel of professionals in military leadership here with us today to discuss this topic. Margot Hoare with Aerospace will be moderating today. I'd like to welcome her to the stage, and she will lead us in this discussion and introduce our esteemed panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Sorry, I didn't realize the mic was on.
Yeah, you really can't see anything.
Some people are older than others on the stage.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Margot Hoare with the Aerospace Corporation. For those of you who may have downloaded the PDF version of the calendar, you may have expected to see me introducing Bill Wolf yesterday. I have a message for you. AI is coming for your jobs. So we've spent a lot of time talking in this conference about organizations and processes and plans and operations, but now we're really going to spend more time talking about people, in particular the Personnel Management Act. I was on a panel similar to this a little over 5 years ago, and I was on stage with a number of soon-to-be Space Force leaders, and we were talking about what would make a successful Space Force. And we talked about this idea of having a more dynamic personnel management approach that would really allow the Space Force to be agile. And at the time, we talked about it as something rather heretical. And now here we are, right, a little over 5 years later, and I'm with several Space Force leaders who are really living this and implementing this. So it's a personal pleasure for me to be on stage with you all talking about this and really seeing this once heretical idea really come to life. So I'm joined with 3 esteemed panelists today. I've got Ms. Catherine Kelly. She's the Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Human Capital. Lieutenant General David Miller, Commander of Space Operations Command, and Brigadier General Dave Yates, Mobilization Assistant to the Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Operations, Cyber, and Nuclear, or as we affectionately call her, COO. All right, so we're going to start off with a question for Ms. Kelly. The Space Force Personnel Management Act was passed as part of the 2024 NDAA, and that made a pretty significant shift in how the Space Force thinks about workforce management. Can you remind us of the origins of PMA? What problem did it solve, or what opportunity is it taking advantage of?
Yeah, thanks very much. I have heard PMA called a lot of things. I hadn't heard it called heretical. So this is a great thing. We'll have to adopt that as we go forward. I think some of my team working hard on it right now would probably agree with that term, though. And I'm looking down the line at Dave Yates specifically. So let's talk a little bit about the origins, because I appreciate the question to start there. First, I will tell you, years in the making. And I don't just mean the last 4 to 5 years in the making of the Space Force. I'm talking about the conundrum that the Department of Defense has with permeability between reserve and regular components writ large. It's something that the DoD's been struggling with for many, many years, decades arguably, and how to take what has happened in our country in terms of family dynamics, multiple career paths for people, taking care of family, both elderly and children, trying to marry that change in our society with what our personnel and talent pools look like in the Department of Defense. That conundrum is what has started a large conversation about how we make things more flexible to try to account for people's reality of life situation. And so what we had with the stand-up of the Space Force and the ability to look broadly at where the space professionals were across the Department of Defense was a unique opportunity to start a better conversation both with the Hill and with the department on how to think about things more agile and flexible for the individual. All that to say, we've come a long way from where the initial inception was to where we are today, which is we actually have the legislation passed last year, which is an unbelievable feat just because of the complexity of what we were trying to get accomplished. Speaks very highly of the people who really conceptualized the original plan and was able to put a foundation in place that allowed those of us who came in as sort of what I'll call the second mover advantage, that team that gets to come in and grab the good idea from someone else and then push it across the finish line. And that's what we've done over the last couple of years. So if I had to describe it, you're talking about a legislation that allows full and part-time work in the Space Force, but solely in the Space Force, absent separate components. So you take the goodness of full and part-time work, which the department has multiple examples of that, but you allow that it's all within one component, one service without separate component, and you give yourself a lot more flexibility to achieve the intent of permeability, but doing it within the Space Force Title X mission, which is a really exciting place to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. General Yates, I'd like to follow up with a question for you because I know you're supporting Ms. Kelly in the implementation. What have you seen or what do you foresee as some of the biggest hurdles to this implementation, and then how are you all addressing that?
Margot, thanks. That's a great question. You know, there's plenty of little hurdles, and I say they're little because we can jump over them, but they're a distraction. They cause delay or maybe some risk in getting to the end state we want. So things like PMA operates in a policy vacuum. So just when the Space Force stood up, there was no policy that said what the Space Force actually is. So at the time, the answer was, well, we'll do what the Air Force does until you can do something different. So now, we could take that same logic and say, well, do what the reserve does, but we also have the Space Force that is pretty mature and robust in terms of policy. So we're kind of falling into that void in between. So we have to resolve that, but we're working on it. We have really smart, dedicated folks doing it. I think another little hurdle we have is on the human capital management system side, because again, there's no system that's really optimized for a force that has full-time and part-time together in an active component or active service. So that is something that we're working on of what has to change to make that happen. I think the biggest hurdle, the only real big hurdle we have is that we can't get to the end state that we envision in one go. It's going to take some incremental steps to get there, and that's going to take some faith on behalf of the force to see it. My best friend in high school restored a 1972 Triumph TR6 convertible, and let me tell you, at the end, that thing was a masterpiece, a work of art. But for most of the 4 years, it was primer gray with bald tires and a borrowed engine and bad shocks. So it took a little faith to see what it was going to be. And if you allow me the analogy, I think it's going to be the same. In the end, it's going to be fantastic. But at first, it'll be like, well, this kind of feels like the reserve. What did you spend all that hard work doing? We open the door, and then we're going to build on that. We're going to synergize what Guardians do across the force, and we'll get to that end state that we envision.
So that's really interesting, this idea of crawl, walk, run, right, which is not unusual to the military. Ms. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about the transition plan? What is that crawl, what is the walk, and what's the run?
I can. We were pretty excited. Just a week and a half ago, we announced the first Tranche 1 move into the Space Force under what the first offering which was allowing people to, from the reserves, volunteer and apply to come in as a full-time Guardian as the first part of this, I'll call it a journey. That's probably the best way to describe it. So the reason that we started there is a little bit of what General Yates just talked about. This is going to take us time to work through the mechanics of how and make sure we do it in a way that is mindful of what I would say are two things. And this is where I think General Miller's comments on this panel are going to be very important to this conversation. We're trying to define how we're going to go through this process of managing full and part-time in the Space Force, and we're also trying to do it with a very clear eye towards the operational warfighter needs that we have in the service. And so this is a pretty delicate walk that we have to do of defining the policy and defining how we're going to use this flexibility within the constructs of the new warfighting domain that we are responsible for and the needs of a service to organize, train, and equip. And so that requires a level of deliberate thinking and planning necessary to make sure that you get this as close to right as you can on the first try. And we're complete realists that we know we're gonna not get everything perfect. But we've got to give it a level of thought process to move through this. So that first Tranche 1 was focused on those who were interested in coming in full-time capacity. We know what those work roles look like. We know what we need. We certainly have many gaps, and we were able to make those offers in order to fill in our requirements and fill in where we know we need expertise in this world. What we're now transitioning to is what are those impediments, both policy and system, like you just heard, and how do we get through those in order to make offerings for part-time and utilizing part-time, which I think we're still probably at least a year in front of before we're able to open up another offering on that. But what we are even closer to is a clear definition of how the Space Force is going to use full and part-time going forward. So we're excited to be able to roll that out soon.
And is that also about, the part-time piece, will that also be about what gaps do we have and how can we fill them?
I think what you'll see is we've done a lot of thinking in the service about how we're going to organize ourselves for the mission we've been asked to do. And what we've done is get a lot of feedback from across the enterprise to understand where we most effectively can maximize the Guardians that we have. And that means both today Guardians and those that will join us over the next several years. And we've thought through where we want to have full-time work and where we can then open the aperture for part-time opportunities as well.
General Miller, Ms. Kelly talked about warfighting. That's why we're all here.
Yep.
Yesterday we talked about the Space Force generation model. How does PMA interact with force generation and providing forces for our combatant commanders?
Yeah, I think for me, the best way to think about it is that we're leveraging the flexibility that the Personnel Management Act gives us in order to really sequence and prioritize where we place talent, but also with a mindset towards there are going to be some things that we do that have been different than maybe we've done it in the past. I talked a little bit yesterday about the paradigm shift of how training and preparing myself was qualitatively and quantitatively different than what a Guardian will go through today. And in the past, if my training requirement was just 1 day a month, which is what it was, or maybe 2, you could see how that might facilitate a short-term opportunity for part-time training and a part-time opportunity. What I described in our Space Force generation model now, with a 6-month cycle, a dedication to a train, prepare and ready phases, that's 9 weeks right now, and candidly, we're looking at it's probably not enough time. It'll have to be longer. A commit phase where people are going to get into 4 to 5 months of time over time where they need to get in. Those are not places where we see part-time roles as primary opportunities. They're just not. It's a full-time commitment. And I think what we're able to do with PMA and in the transition of some of the full-time authorizations that may have been in the Air Force Reserve in the past is I'm filling gaps that I have within the combat force for manpower in the combat crews. So I went through, and Kate saw it last spring, and prioritized 1 to N where I saw the gaps in the combat crews, mission planning cells, or wherever. And what I'm able to do, because the flexibility of what PMA offers, is leverage those to go back and say, hey, well, we have some full-time authorizations that can fill in where we see some of these gaps. But because I also have talent available coming from the reserves, I look at it and go, well, those aren't the only roles that they're going to be in the service. While the combat force and the tactical combat units are absolutely going to be a full-time commitment, we just went also through a sourcing conference, and we identified some teams that allow us for EW and targeting that we see in the future that could be predictable, deployable opportunities, either associated with our units in CONUS or potentially overseas. Those actually may be places where if you provide predictability, if you have a long enough duration, there may be a part-time role or opportunity, in addition to places like one of the previous panels was service component staffs. We're going to have a huge exercise here this summer that's going to last for several weeks. Those are great opportunities in my mind where you can have talent and expertise that is really steeped in our mission areas in the past, provide some additional capability on a predictable schedule for some of those part-time roles. I just don't see it in terms of the tactical combat units. That's a full-time work role. That's not something that we're going to do part-time.
If I could just jump in real quick. This is exactly why I think it's useful for me to just make this point, because I get asked this a lot. When are you gonna get this all figured out, and how quickly can you make this happen? And what General Miller just really poignantly pointed out is that as a service, we are looking at how we need to organize ourselves. We are looking at where we have demand and not enough supply. And we're looking at what really needs to be a full-time mission and then what could be a part-time mission. And it's really important for us to use that foundation before we make offers and start actually impacting on people's personal decisions and choices to apply to come into the Space Force.
You bet.
And so that lash up of getting the house organized inside the Space Force with some level of clarity of how we're going to do this first is part of the reason why we're taking this deliberate strategy.
And I love that idea that there's not just 2 tools in the toolkit, right? There's an innumerable number of different tools that you can bring to bear because of the PMA Act to really build the Space Force that the nation needs. That's really cool. And General Miller, your comment about locking in the units, the combat units, resonates with me a lot. I spent a lot of my career supporting the Marine Corps, and during OIF and OEF, one of the critical things was how much time the entire unit had to be together and prepare before they deployed. So that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, when you combine the excellent work that STARCOM is doing to build a foundational course for Guardians to develop the skills they need, and then their first operational tour in Space Operational Command, we'll have a baseline of what a Guardian can do, what expertise they have. So at that point, if they continue on full-time or if they elect to go into a part-time role for a period of time, we know what they're good for. So it'll be very easy to seamlessly decide, all right, this would be a great role for Guardian and part-time, and we can immediately put them into that role.
General Yates, we've talked about gaps and filling gaps. One of the key advantages of the PMA is for Guardians to be able to kind of bridge their experiences and bring expertise into the Space Force and then out of the Space Force, right? Because of this permeability. What does that mean for you in terms of that gap filling? How does the Space Force plan to harness that expertise from inside and across and as well as outside the Space Force?
I think that really will be a secret sauce. It's something that an active service today really can't do unless they engineer it with experience with industry. There are mechanisms, but to have access to that. So I think you need to do a couple of things. So you need a schema to be able to recognize, exploit, and reward those skill sets. So I think the Department of Defense does a really good job with language skills. The DoD will train people in certain languages, but if you grew up with a language or learned it in Catholic school, we have a test, you get a rating, and we know how to characterize and exploit that. So there's no reason why we couldn't think about space, intel, cyber skills in a method like that, or even some complementary external skills. So we need that to be able to assess what do we have, and then we need the flexibility to put someone with a unique talent set into the right role to add value. So, and that's, I think, one of the real strengths of part-time work roles is because full-time is really embedded into your essential tasks for a unit, your unit type code and responsibilities. To some extent, part-time roles are also embedded, but some will have the ability to flexibly apply, where we need to put that talent. So being able to do that says I can match the Guardian with the right skill set to the right problem at the right time. And then I think you also have the ability to focus unique skills into an area like advanced training or advanced concept development, where today you just have to do the best you can or develop in-house that expertise, and it takes a while. So if you have someone that can bring that to the table, why not leverage it? A conversation I had with General Troy Endicott a while ago, we were talking about some of the great people in the reserve component, and it's like some of these people really are unicorns, and he's like, yeah, and we need to use them as unicorns. If you're having them do what any first-term Guardian can do, you're kind of missing the boat on return on investment.
Yep. I agree.
We actually had a lot of conversation with the Hill about this aspect of PMA when we were kind of negotiating to get this done. And there's the opportunities that were just described, and then there's the further opportunity of really connecting experience that people can bring from either the private sector or academia or otherwise, or in other service, quite frankly, and then lashing up that background and expertise with a tangible job in the Space Force that actually leverages the skill. And when we characterized it that way and not characterized it as somebody's got 1 foot in a private sector company and 1 foot inside the service, that created a lot of tension, but for obvious reasons. When we described the greater aspect of this, which was to leverage the skill and take advantage of the need inside the service, then the light bulb went on and we were able to get this across the finish line.
Because it's not just about personnel management, it's about talent management.
It is, absolutely. There's so many aspects to it. There's retention aspects, there's capitalization on what people bring and what aspects of their work and personal life can come into play, and then trying to get those things to align as best you can.
And General Yates talked about the tooling aspect of this, right? The systems that underpin it. I imagine that besides active duty or reserve or part and full-time, you also have the need to track the unicorns and the specific expertise. Is that part of the plan for the system piece of it?
Yeah, the system piece of this is really a big challenge, and it's hard to see everybody in the audience, but if I asked you to raise your hand if you think that DoD has good HR systems, I guarantee you I wouldn't see one hand up. So this is a larger issue, right? This is something that the DoD writ large is struggling with. To the earlier comment made, we now have a legislative authority that no one else has. So not only do we not have a perfectly conceptualized HR system that, because we're leveraging the existing Air Force systems largely and those intersections with DoD and other entities. But now we have a legislative authority that gives you an ability to do something that no one else can do, so you really don't have a system in place to do that. So that's one of these reasons why this deliberate strategy of understanding how we're going to use this talent, where it's best employed in the force, is so foundational to how we move forward, because we're going to have to address how to make the current systems work as best we can while we have an eye towards a longer game and a more agile game from an underpinning of a system.
I remember General Raymond saying that he had been charged with truly making the Space Force the first 21st century service and doing things different. And obviously this is a big piece of doing things differently for a modern service. And I think this is a question for all of you. And I know we're early in the implementation, but are there any lessons learned that you would offer to the other services or DoD writ large in thinking about modernizing talent management with PMA?
I have a lot of thoughts on that.
I'll let Kate answer that question.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. We need a whole nother panel. So first I will say we are very much in the start phase of this. So being able to say there are lessons learned is not a good statement. There are lessons observed. There are challenges that we have faced. There are things that we've identified as hurdles we've got to get through. I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say we've learned lessons yet. What I would tell you is the observation that I see is I'm really excited about where the Space Force has chosen to start the conversation, and that is, how does the Space Force organize itself to do its mission? Because it would have been very expected, not necessarily easy, but it would have been very expected for the Space Force to just say, okay, let's just bring part-time people into the service and then we'll figure it out.
Right.
You know what that would have resulted in? A lot of not well-treated people and bad impacts, because we wouldn't have had the policies and we certainly don't have the systems. And it took some institutional courage, I would say, for us to take a breath and spend the time defining how we're going to organize, the way that General Miller just described the SPA4Gen need and what's going to be a full-time enduring mission set versus what could be part-time. It took some institutional courage to do that, and I think that was a very smart move. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the only other point we'd done, had we done what Kate said also, we'd have had we'd have missed an opportunity to retain some awesome talent, because they would have felt underutilized. We wouldn't have leveraged their skills and competencies. There would have been very little in the way of placing them where the greatest need was. And anybody who joins our team just wants to be able to contribute, right? Feel valued as a part of a team, giving 100% and never letting that team down. And making sure, for me, the success here is that we're going to close readiness gaps in tactical formations because of the flexibility of the Personnel Management Act. We're simultaneously going to be able to align the talent and expertise that we have, in many cases, decades of experience, towards some of the harder problems, in whether it's a staff job, a team someplace else, and so on. So we're solving both readiness challenges as well as solving the talent management and placement challenges. And I think you got to do it in times to sequence. And if we'd have tried to rush into it a little bit quicker, I think we would have, I'll be honest with you, it would have been a serious retention challenge. We would have lost the opportunity to keep people who would have been frustrated because we weren't best leveraging what they bring to the fight.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think the deliberate strategy here, there's pros and cons on all sides, but I certainly think the lesson observed about that is a good one.
Gates, anything to add?
Only thing I would add is we've learned as we've gone that we have to constantly refocus ourselves on where does Space Force need to go. Because the mission of the Space Force has been evolving, the organization's been evolving, so you can't design a system that works great for a part-time Guardian and work backwards. You have to design it systematically. What does the Space Force need? The Space Force needed a force presentation model. The Space Force needs component commands. Design that structure and then build to that with the personnel Otherwise, you're sub-optimizing. So, and that's, again, we constantly have to remind ourselves because it's hard. So you want to take the easy button and say, this is probably good enough. You can't stop it good enough. And that takes time, which we don't have, and it takes effort, which we do have, and we're putting it on the problem.
All right, so we are running short on time here. That tends to happen when you're having fun. Hope you guys are having fun. So my final question for all of you, although General Miller, I think you answered this already, but I'm going to ask you again. Maybe you have more to say. What does success look like for PMA?
I think I said that, but absolutely. So I think a couple things. I think this is a great opportunity for the service, and I think we'll be judged by a few key things. The first is how we leverage the flexibility that we were given in legislation in order to solve our key challenges. And if this service chief has been consistent on any one point, his number one priority is readiness of the force. And the simple truth is, as we really, in some cases, reshaped and designed, and we're getting ready for the next couple of years with the partnership of folks like Space Systems Command, Space RCO, to bring on more capability into this service. So we really designed tactical formations that we could generate and present to combatant commanders in a really unique way from where we've been. And we had to fill a number of key gaps in order to get those units whole. So for me, success number one always starts and ends with the readiness of the force. And if I can close in gaps, fill out another combat crew, provide ISR professionals as a part of that combat squadron, or field cyber units embedded in our mission teams in order to do that, then all the better. And I think that's one thing that the other services will judge us by. The second thing they'll judge us by is how we develop our talent and retain it. And at the end of this, if we look back and the folks who have the opportunity to take a period of time where they need a part-time role because of some life change or something that's going on with them, and they can find how they are valued because we have deliberately placed some specific opportunities to give them predictability and maximizing their contribution to the service, then we're going to be able to keep and retain and recruit the best talent, which is what we're doing right now. If we fail to do both of those things, deliver on readiness and deliver on developing and managing the talent that we have, we're going to be a model of what not to do from the other services. So that's how I would define it.
General Yates, what does success look like for you?
So tactically, I would like to successfully complete the transfers so that the Space Force and the Air Force can move on and focus on their problem sets. And then enable the career continuation for Guardians that we're envisioning so that they have options as they develop their expertise and they look at what does their career look like. But long term, I think success is really an attitude within the Space Force that this is just how it works. This is how we do business, that we're all Guardians. And if we're to that point, then part-time will just be another variable in the equation for what skill set do you have, what missions have you worked, where have you been assigned, what work roles have you had? And we don't have any value judgment about it. You contribute what you contribute, we exploit the capability you provide, and we reward you for what you bring to the table. So that's where I would like to be, and then we'll know that this really worked.
Kelly, final words?
So I think it was perfectly articulated between those two comments. I agree completely with both. The point on the end of the sentence that I would add is that for me, success looks like a ledge prop from another service that copies Subtitle F that the Space Force has, right? Because if we achieve what was just described, there are multiple other services that are going to want to do it. And to me, the success is to see them go into the Hill with their own version of a Personnel Management Act to have the kind of agility and talent management capability that we have in the Space Force today.
Particularly because it is designed to, as General Miller said, right, help you achieve a purpose-built force that is designed to get after your mission with the unicorns and the right talent at the right time in the right place. All right. Please join me in a round of applause for the panel. Thank you all so much.